I would like to be remembered for somebody who, for better or worse.
Alrighty. So Mark, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. The book Bottle Lightning, I got it immediately when I saw on LinkedIn, and I read it that night.
Yeah, that's what you said. I really that's it's hard to get a higher praise than that from a reader.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, well, it's not that it's an easy read either. There's a lot of characters, there's a lot of different places they go to, and a lot to keep track of.
Right. It's one reason why I put the list of characters in the beginning, and
Mm,
also why I have a map, particularly for readers who aren't familiar with Japan
mm,
or Northeast Asia. I thought it might be helpful. There's a lot of Japanese names, right?
mm.
And yeah, could people could who aren't familiar with Japan could lose track of that, for example.
Easy. Well, I appreciated the little things like let me just gush about the book for a second here. Like I said, not that it's an easy read, but uh it was so riveting. Like the first scene is a motorcycle chase, and I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but I mean, you have like the freeway exits for the freeway in Japan. You have like little things like I picked up Taniguchi, the detective who has a bad ear, and he does judo,
Yes.
and I thought, oh, he's probably got cauliflower ear from judo,
Yeah, exactly.
and I thought, okay, that's the martial artist in Mark. And then the details, the BMW, the even the little relationship stuff, like Mayumi says different things, no spoilers once again, but Mayumi says different things that makes Torn uncomfortable. He's like, where did she learn that?
Yeah, exactly.
So, so
Exactly. Didn't want to dig too deeply into that.
right.
Or at least he didn't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and so I can also see, because I've led a very, what would I say, fun, complicated life. I can see you have a lot of life experience, and uh it's a trite question, but how much of Torn is Mark and how much of Mark is Torn? Or is there places where he takes a total departure from you? Or
Well, so yeah, it's an excellent question. And there's a an English author, I think from the 19th century, who P.D. James is her name, and she has one of my favorite quotes, or made one of my favorite quotes, which is something to the effect that all fiction is autobiographical and much autobiography is fiction, which I find it funny, but also really true. And one of the axioms in writing is to I hope I'm using that word right, but to write what you know.
mm,
And so I had this character in mind, and it was based on me. It was based on an international lawyer who was running the Tokyo office of a global firm, and but it over time it morphed. The more I thought about it, as it interacted, that character interacted with the other characters, and my son's mother is Japanese, and so he's biracial, and so I started thinking about that angle, and so over time he morphed into something that was different, which is a good thing because it gives you more room to explore that character. But the short answer to your question is a lot of me went into Torn. There's no doubt about it.
cool, cool. Yeah, he's very, very likable character. And who do you think would play Torn in the movie? And I've got an idea, but I don't want to like poison the well.
It's a really good question, and I've thought about it because I've actually had some knocking on the door from studios, and none of it's gone um, anywhere yet. But still working on it. The writers and actors strike sort of got
Mm,
for a few months, but maybe now that that's getting resolved, things will move forward. We'll see. But the one option is that guy from Crazy Rich Asians who played the groom,
Okay.
who is now older.
Mm,
I think he could be more age appropriate. But the guy I was Keanu Reeves,
oh,
I also thought of, but he may be too senior at this point. Because he's my age. I think he's like 61
okay.
or 62. But he's definitely an option because he has that, that look, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and then I don't know if you're a fan of the new Hawaii Five-O.
Mm,
But the new Hawaii Five-O has a biracial character in it who was the son of a mafioso, and then he basically flipped and became a good guy.
okay.
And he was I forget the actor's name, but he was having a relationship with one of the female police officers. Anyway, that guy really looks the part, and he's also actually a pretty good actor, and he could do the action. So there are a lot of options, but that's one part of the production that I would want to be involved in is
Mm,
who is cast in that role. I would like it to be an actual biracial person,
mm.
but if it were Keanu Reeves, that would not be the end of the world.
That's funny because I had written down, I don't know if you can see it. Oh, it's blurry. I had written down Keanu Reeves.
Yeah, that was one of the people who sort of popped into my head. And but yeah, I like that question because I like thinking about what it would look like on the big screen. I think there's a lot of different scenes in it that are very cinematic.
Mm.
And for me, Tokyo was actually one of the characters in the book.
Oh, yeah.
The city
Yes.
is a living entity, and so showcasing the city, which I don't know when you first came to Japan, but I first visited Tokyo in 1978, and it was a very, very different place.
Yeah.
And the way, the wonderful city that we all know and love, it wasn't that then. And
Mhm.
so, I would really like to see that showcased. And I tried to write the book in a sort of a cinematic way that
Mm.
showcased some of that.
Mhm. No, that's funny because I thought of Keanu Reeves and but I didn't pick up on Tokyo being a character, even though I mean it's like a huge character. But I thought of Keanu Reeves because the scene in John Wick where he's on the motorcycle
Yes.
and
Yeah.
he's good with weapons. In fact, he developed a technique for unchambering a clip that is now used in competition shooting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean he's that good, and he did the kung fu for Matrix and everything. So
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
he's got
Right.
the full package. But boy, but then and not a knock on Keanu Reeves, but people might see it as a John Wick character.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you know what
Although
though?
he's diverse enough, he might have to shave his beard or trim his beard in a different way or
Mhm.
and do something with his hair. But
Mhm.
his career is diverse enough. I think he could get away
Oh,
with it.
well, I mean, anybody who can go from like, what comedy to romance to action, you know,
Yes.
just he can do it. He's one of those very versatile actors. So, and who would play? Do you have any idea for like Saya or Mayumi or Yukie or anybody?
Yeah. So that's the hardest person to cast would be the most would be Mayumi, who I think is the most interesting character,
Mm,
actually. And I don't really know. I think I would have to do a deep dive into who is,
mm,
currently acting in Japan. I don't mind taking, I should be so lucky as to have it made into a movie at all. But an unknown is just we have to find the right person to play that character.
mm,
Um, there, the again, this woman, I actually think she's Korean American on Hawaii Five-O could
mm,
play one of the characters, could play either Yukie or Kiwako.
mm.
Um, and she's quite good as well. But the Mayumi character, would be challenging. Also, the children finding casting
Mm.
the could be interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Now, taking a little different twist on this, in a movie about your life, who would play you?
Well, that's a really good question.
And not to put you on the spot, but
Pierce Brosnan,
perfect.
a younger Pierce Brosnan. I mean, not that there's anything wrong. I think he's 10 years older than I am. So, but
Yeah,
maybe that's perfect.
perfect, perfect. And keep kind of going on this. Like, if you had a magic one type of world here, what songs do you hear when you think of the soundtrack?
Oh, I think of well, you don't know, but I think of songs that work well on a motorcycle, and
Mm,
all motorcycles are different, but for that BMW motorcycle, the way the acoustics of the motorcycle work with the fairing and the speakers in the back and the speakers in the front,
mm,
certain songs work really well with it, and certain songs don't.
mm,
And the songs that you think would work well don't necessarily work well, and some that you think wouldn't work well do work well. But it would be a very eclectic soundtrack, and I think would include what is it, Led Zeppelin's
mm.
what's it called, Foggy Mountain Top or something like
Okay.
that, which is a wonderful song. Gorillas, Feel Good Inc.
Mm.
I'm a fan of Macklemore. There are several songs of his. Imagine Dragons. There are several songs from there.
Mhm.
One of my favorite songs that I've really over the years grown to love is uh, "You Can't Always Get What You Want,"
Mm.
which musically and lyrically is just a brilliant song.
That's
Um,
that would be like Torn's theme.
Yeah,
Things.
it could be exactly. Actually, I really like that. That would be his theme. But there's also like something brassy, like from Chicago.
Ah.
Does anyone know what time it is,
Mm.
or 20? What is it? 24 to 5 or something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many. They've got so many iconic songs. But it would be a very eclectic, in
Mm.
my mind, soundtrack, and a lot of it would revolve around the motorcycle,
Mm, mm,
at
mm.
least in my mind. Or I should let me put it this way: a lot of it comes from all the time I enjoyed listening to music on a motorcycle, and particularly driving around Japan. And Japan is the perfect country for driving in a motorcycle because there's so many different types of roads, so many different types of terrain. All the roads are very well maintained, very safe. People pay attention to you. There's lots of windy roads, lots of mountain roads, lots of coastal roads. So it's just a perfect place for that.
Yeah.
And I spent so much time writing and listening to music. And the thing about that motorcycle is it's so well designed. When you accelerate, because the engine gets louder, the music automatically, the volume goes up.
Mm.
And that was a very dangerous feature, because when you were listening to something you really liked and you came to a crescendo in the music, your instinct is to pump it up, so you speed up.
Yeah.
And so you're feeling ecstatic, and the last thing you don't want to be, you want to feel, you want to be maintaining sort of zen-like presence when driving a motorcycle. And you don't want to be feeling emotion, essentially, if you want to drive safely.
No, as I grew up on dirt bikes, so not much on the freeway. And as I got older, I got into cars. I had a BMW 540, which is a fantastic car. And when you mention acoustics, like, just turn the stereo off and listen to the car. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
right,
music as well,
right.
right? So BMW does so many things so well.
Which I used to do a lot, actually, and particularly when running around the circuit there on the expressway at night, which I used to do sometimes after work. Like you say, just turn off the music, and I loved listening as I changed gears.
Mm.
And then also the sounds of the city, and if you go out late at night, you've got the Rudetozoku running around, and
Yeah.
and I was in my late 40s and 50s. I was sort of way, not hanging out with an age appropriate crowd when I was driving around, but it was a lot of fun to
Oh
see
yeah.
all these different cars and motorcycles.
Hmm. And I think that's why you know, movies like Tokyo Drift or games like what was that one? There was an old Nintendo game that was where you would drive on the Shuto.
Oh,
And
I don't know that game.
oh man, a friend of mine lent me his Nintendo years ago, like in the I came here in 1990, and in the late 90s, a friend, I want to say it was a Nintendo, and he lent that to me. And you get your car, and when you win races, you earn money, you win money, and you can use that money to upgrade your car. So, and then you could go on the Shuto
Oh,
or
nice. Oh,
oh, it was
nice.
fantastic. And then they had this memory card. It was like an SD card, but much thicker. Stick that in the console, and then you could save your cars.
Oh, I see.
So and I think that's why like so many games and movies are based on Tokyo freeways because they're like you said, they're so well maintained.
Yeah.
They're great. I love driving on, you
And
know.
intricate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And think about what we did before the advent of the knobby, right? You had
Oh
to
yeah.
pull out the map, and
Yep.
if you missed your turn off, then it was like a big hassle to get back and figure out how do you get back on. And
Oh yeah.
I mean, the thing is just a labyrinth, right?
It's
And
incredible. And um let's see, yeah, I do remember the map, and I forget which map it was, but you would go to the end of a page, like you'd be on the Kampachi, the Ring Road 8 that goes around Tokyo. You'd be in the Kampachi and you get to like a certain road, and then you'd have to go, and on the corner it would say go to page A26. And
yeah, right. That's right. That's right. I I remember. Yes, yes, that's exactly right. I
right,
remember that. And then you're like, what the right?
right. And then they had these Nukemichi maps.
Right.
When you go on vacation and you drive out to like Yamanashi or something, there were these maps that you could buy. And Nukemichi just means what, like side road or something.
Shortcut.
Shortcut. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. Shortcut. And so you'd be on the freeway and you would see they have these signs that say, okay, the next 5 kilometers are going to, they're red. So there's going to be a traffic jam. So you pull out the Nukemichi map and you would see, okay, there's a side road or a service road that goes along here, and I can get off there and follow that and bypass this traffic jam. Those were great. Those are
Yeah, I
great.
used to pour over those maps because I went down to Shikoku and Kyushu, and I went up to Tohoku,
Mm,
and I went up on the Pacific side and came down on the Sea of Japan side, and to put together the whole itinerary, I would
mm,
just pour over those maps, and I'd be copying pages, and you're right, they would tell you, like on weekends, for example, which roads tended to crowd up where. Of course, now the Navi does all that for you in real time.
yeah.
But that was sort of one of the fun things about, preparing for a touring trip was
Mm,
pulling for those maps.
hmm It's great. Yeah. Now I do kind of wish I rode motorcycles because I have a couple friends who have them, and one guy is a motorcycle rider and a drone pilot. So he'll go, out to the country, fly the drone, and then come back. And those two seem to go together pretty nice. Now, shifting gears here about M&A, your life in M&A, what's the thrill of M&A? And for non-lawyers, mergers and acquisitions.
So the thrill of it is you're um, if you're particularly if you're running the deal, I think as a junior associate or a legal assistant, there's less thrill depending on what your assignment is, because
Yeah.
you're sort of just a cog, and depending on how good your boss is, they may be not giving you a lot of information about the rest of the deal, and you're sort of in the dark about what role you what the importance or lack thereof of your role and its impact on the entire deal. But if you're actually running the deal,
Mm,
then you're sort of you feel like an orchestra conductor,
mm,
because you're essentially buying another business, or in some cases several businesses, or selling it on
mm,
behalf of a client. I enjoyed being on the buy side
Mm.
more, because then that gives you an opportunity to really learn about another business. And so what I mean by being a conductor is you have to, the first thing to do is to look at the business and figure out what the issues are. And so, what's the potential liability, say for product liability, what are their insurance claims, what intellectual property issues do they have that are patent related or copyright related, what trademark issues do they have, what contracts do they have with suppliers. So you're looking at the whole company from a holistic perspective, and trying to tell the client, where are the risks and how can you minimize the risks. And then that will help you, once you know what the company is, it helps you negotiate, if necessary, a better deal for the client than they might have negotiated themselves. But if it's a cross-border deal now overlaid on those legal issues, it's not just the legal issues in one country or one state, but you start dealing with the legal issues across several countries. And then you've got the language issues, and then, as you know, the cultural issues. And Japan and the US are so different. Essentially, you've got a non-Judeo Christian culture butting heads with a Judeo-Christian culture, and they're so different, right? Even now, right? And so I found that whole, and then the time zones, and you end up having teams who are working on due diligence or some agreement in China, in India, in Australia, in the US, Japan, France, and sort of orchestrating all that and actually getting it moving in the right direction, which is a little like herding cats. I just found fascinating.
Exactly. No, that, and so I do let's see, right out of law school, I went into the automotive sector, and then was going to go into IP. I had done humanities as an undergrad degree, but I was very fascinated by IP. And so I was actually either thinking of going to get the 30 credits so I could sit for the patent bar as well, because it was so fascinating. And then that was 2007. 2008, we all know what happened with the housing market, which affected the automotive market, which affected my job. And I got a call from a friend who said, "Have you ever done e-discovery?" I said, "I don't know, but I need a job." And he said, "Well, we have a Japanese client with a bunch of documents to go through." And so I got involved in that, and I'm still doing it. And it's fascinating because, and this leads into a question for you, is it's fascinating because I get to work on things, and I've said this on my other channels, other interviews, that you see something before it gets in the news. And so when it comes up, I just kind of grin. My friends say, "Hey, did you hear about this or that?" I just, wow, that's interesting. Have you ever had that situation, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, well, confidentiality is paramount, right? And that was sort of beat into us from from the time we were a junior associate, and the training just got more intense, over the years, because insider trading became such a serious issue. From the time I became a lawyer in 1988, it really started. And then in Japan in the 90s, it became a serious issue as well. So, and particularly when you're dealing with publicly traded companies, but also privately traded companies or privately owned companies, that's the confidentiality is very important there because of like you say, the IP issues, or could have an impact on litigation or something like that. And so it was always something that that I was very sensitive to. I never traded in publicly traded stock, for example, or securities, because I didn't want to be worried about that issue. And then arbitration in the context of mergers and acquisitions and litigation would pop up, and there too, confidentiality is very important. And as you know, depending on what's happening in the litigation or arbitration, that can move the stock price. And so I remember when I was working both in Tokyo and in New York, there were investment banks in our building. And so, like, Izumi Garden, there used to be at least three in there, for example. So in the elevator, you know, it was very important to be careful what you were talking about, right? And you know, in that elevator, in that office building, you've got the giant shuttle elevators, right? I mean, it
Yeah.
holds what, 50 people or something,
Yeah.
right? And you
It's
change to
yeah,
the
it's
you
huge.
know the smaller elevators, and you never know who's there and who speaks English and who doesn't, and
Yeah.
you know, so yeah, it's just something you have to be aware of all the time. And then there were actually times where we were told, I remember that you know, people could be listening into your conversations even outside using some type of electronic device, and so be careful and don't talk on your cell phone and things like that. I know some of that shows up in the book as well,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
that's where I started becoming sensitive to that. And then we actually had some clients who suffered from trade secret misappropriation, which in a really sort of cloak and dagger kind of ways, where employees actually stole, you know, in one case, software that had been newly developed, and they stole the source code and sold it. And in another case, they actually removed a bacteria that had been engineered by our client, and had given them a huge advantage in the industry.
Mhm.
And they stole the bacteria and put it. They were all checked every day when they left the plant, but they
Wow.
put it in like this little plastic bag in their bra,
Oh,
and and took it out that way. So, you know, you hear enough of this, you know, over the years to realize that it's actually not just in the movies, or rather, I should say, there's a reason it's in the movies, and that's
yeah.
because it happens in real life, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and there's funny things in movies. So I still am a big fan of Fight Club, and they said that when they filmed the movie and Tyler Durden gives the formula for napalm, they got a lot of complaints. They said that's not the right formula, and the director said, "Well, we're not going to give the real formula.
Yeah, right,
You think I'm
exactly.
crazy?"
That's a brilliant movie.
Oh, it amazing, and I love movies with a twist, like Sixth Sense, and Fight Club, and I've heard rumors of part two. I don't know how you would do it because they blew everything up, and
Well, he survived, so maybe, but that author is a very
yeah.
has written some other really. My son was a huge fan of that author. He
Mm-hmm.
wrote some other really interesting books. I think one of them was Lullaby, and that was a really disturbing book, but fun. You know, it was like Fight Club with that whole dysfunction about, you know, going to those self-help meetings, and
Mm.
right, that he meets that. Well, I mean, that is just brilliant to
Yeah.
think of him. I mean, that scene where he's yelling, he's having the, I guess the woman becomes his girlfriend, but he's spoiler alert. He's having the shouting match with her because
Oh,
she's moving in on his monopoly,
Marla
right?
Singer.
What's that?
Marla Singer,
Marla.
the tourist. Helena
And
Bonham Carter. I had no idea she wasn't American. Her accent was so good.
oh, is that right?
Yeah, I think she's Australian.
Well, you know that guy who played House,
Yeah,
it, that guy's English. I didn't know he was English until I
Hugh
saw
Laurie.
an interview. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it is interesting because he has a very good, and the thing, and I always explain to my Japanese friends is that, I mean, almost anybody can play an American because we're
Right.
used to having so many accents. I mean, depending on where you go in the States, there's people from different countries everywhere. So,
Right.
and Hugh Laurie had a great accent in House, and I didn't realize it until I saw him on Friends. He has a cameo,
Oh, interesting.
and he uses his real accent. And then when he does his interviews, he uses his real accent. And they say,
You
"Oh,
know, he was in 101 Dalmatians as one of the bad guys when he was young.
Now, just really quick, we got like 9 minutes to go, but
Sure.
I didn't interview. I auditioned for a British actor part. I have a friend who's an agent, and every once in a while, like once a year, he'll call me up and say, "Hey, I need you to go to an audition." And I always think like, I'm the they got a 7 and they need a 5 to make the 7 look like a 10. So they bring me.
Right.
But I interviewed for a part as a
That is harsh. That is so harsh.
hey, we're our own worst critics, right? So um but I auditioned next to a British guy and they said, okay, you're going to read this in a British accent. I said, all right then. And I start talking and the guy looks at me kind of funny. And afterward he goes, I know you're not British. And I said, well, you can tell and I can tell, but the director can't tell
Right.
because
Right.
he's, Japanese director. And I, people can't tell the difference between a, British, Australian, American, Canadian accent.
Yeah. Right.
So the thrill of M&A, knowing something before it gets in the news. What does the news get wrong?
About him, almost everything. Well, it's no, I remember I had, how partners can be. I remember there's a senior litigation partner in New York that I was working with, and we were working on a litigation matter. When I was junior back in the day, they let you rotate through different departments, which was really great for your career. And there was some big litigation in the news, and I was doing probably discovery.
Mm.
And I remember him calling us all into the room. Of course, there was no discovery then. Calling us into the room and saying, "Okay, now no talking to the press." And he said, "Over the years, I have realized that the press struggles with the facts." And that statement, that just like deadpan, total just it has always stuck with me. And the other thing he said was, you got to realize the press only gets things about half right 50% of the time. And
Mm.
so essentially they're getting 25% of it right. And that's always stuck with me. And I think it's really true. And there are a variety of reasons for that. They have deadlines.
Yeah.
There's only so much space they have. They're rushing to get the scoop.
Mm.
And so I'm not necessarily faulting the press, although one could take that position. But that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
I've been interviewed and as a lawyer and quoted, and they'll ask me to confirm the quote. I'll confirm the quote. It'll come out and then it'll be wrong. And some editor upstream edited it, right? And so anyway, those are my thoughts.
Last question, and thank you for your time. I really appreciate this. Last question. So you're, lawyer, angler, author. What do you want to be remembered for?
Oh, wow, that's a really good question. I would like to be remembered for somebody who, for better or worse, followed their heart and decided to be engage in adventure. I mean, I wanted to go someplace outside of the US as a teenager and signed up as an exchange student, and that took me to Japan. And I saw my father do a murder trial, and
Mm.
decided I wanted to be a lawyer. But when I
Mm.
got to Japan, people said, "Oh, you need to do international law," and that took me to New York, and then eventually I practiced in New York, and eventually I ended up back in Japan, and so my whole life has just been one big adventure,
Mm.
and that's true with the fishing as well. And I just have no complaints about that. But if I hadn't taken some risks along the
Mm.
way that were not necessarily the best from a business plan standpoint, for example, my life would not nearly have been as rich as it has been today.
That's that's great to hear. It kind of follows the hero's journey. Have you studied Joseph Campbell at all?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan.
As an author, I mean, that's kind of a dumb question, but like,
No, but I mean, I was a huge fan of his 30 years ago when I
Hmm.
became very interested in religious history.
Okay.
And it was only later when I started writing that I realized his hero's journey was a big part of sort of the writing culture.
Hmm. My entree was through George Lucas or Luke Skywalker,
Oh, yeah, right.
and the
Right.
whole,
Oh, that's interesting.
and that's why Star Wars worked. I mean, that's he's got the call to adventure. Come with me to Alderaan. The
Yeah,
refusal to call, like I got to stay here on the moisture farm. And then he's got the allies, the enemies, the you know, the
exactly.
return
When
home.
you And the whole force thing comes from ki, right?
Did you know, I figured this out recently. It's hard for people who haven't studied Japanese to pronounce Japanese, that the word Jedi comes from Jidai Geki.
No way.
No joke. No,
Wow.
the mispronunciation of Jedi became Jedi.
Oh, that's fascinating. Was
I
that Lucas who did that?
think so, yeah.
You're a Jedi warrior. That totally makes sense, right? Oh my God. I was a huge fan of those Jidaigeki, those back in the day, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
That helped with my Japanese to a certain extent.
Well, I just watched a lot of TV.
Yeah, me too. Me
But hey,
too.
we're gonna run out of time, so I'm gonna say thank you, man. This has been great, and I could keep going forever, but I know you got stuff to do.
Well, thank you, and let's catch up when I'm in Japan.
I'd love to. Let's do it. Thanks, Mark.
Take care, Tracy.